Welcome, weary traveler, to a quiet journey through time. As the world outside begins to hush its busy clamor, allow your mind to drift gently, like a leaf upon a slow-moving stream, carried by currents of ancient history. Tonight, we will embark on a tranquil exploration into a period often shrouded in mist and mystery, a time when the grand tapestry of Roman Britain began to unravel, revealing a new, untamed landscape, rich with whispers of what was and what would be. Find your most comfortable position, let your breath deepen, and feel the gentle pull of gravity inviting you to surrender to relaxation. There's no need to focus, no requirement to remember. Simply allow the soft currents of history to wash over you, carrying you towards a place of deep calm and restful sleep. We'll journey back to a land in transition, a land reshaping itself after centuries of Roman order, a place where the echoes of legions faded and new rhythms began to beat. Imagine the rustle of ancient leaves, the distant call of an unknown bird, the subtle scent of damp earth as we step back, very, very slowly, into the early 5th century. Let the calm envelop you, drawing you deeper into the quietude of the past, as we contemplate a time when the familiar shifted and the unknown began its gentle, inexorable creep across the land. It's a story not of dramatic collapse, but of a quiet, profound transformation, a slow sigh from the stones and fields of a changing island. Imagine yourself now, standing on a slightly damp, overgrown track in what was once the vibrant heart of Roman Britain, perhaps around the year 410 of the Common Era. The morning air is cool, carrying the familiar scent of damp earth, rich and fertile, mingled now with the subtle, earthy aroma of wood smoke drifting from a distant hearth. As you softly observe, look around you. The grand, straight roads, meticulously engineered by Roman hands, once the arteries of a vast empire, are still present, yes, but they are beginning to show the first subtle signs of neglect. Grasses might be pushing persistent shoots through the cracks in the paving stones, and the verges are quietly reclaiming their wildness, tiny shoots asserting their gentle presence where once there was meticulous upkeep. The familiar sound of a distant legionary marching patrol, once a constant reassurance, is no more. The legions, those disciplined protectors of Rome, are gone. Their rhythmic marching boots no longer echo on the solid cobbles. Their drills are no longer heard on the training grounds of the forts. Their departure wasn't a sudden dramatic exodus, a single thunderous withdrawal, but rather a gradual, almost imperceptible process that unfolded over decades. Soldiers were slowly recalled to defend other, more vulnerable parts of the sprawling Roman Empire, where barbarian pressures were more immediate and pressing. What remains now is a quiet echo, a lingering impression of their order, like the faint imprint of a hand in soft clay. The meticulous machinery of Roman administration, with its bustling forums where decrees were read and justice administered, its structured tax collections flowing like predictable rivers to distant treasuries, and its regular flow of goods and directives from distant Rome, has slowly, quietly begun to recede, much like the tide withdrawing from a vast shoreline, leaving behind intricate, drying patterns in the sand. The grand plan, the imperial design, is subtly fading. Think of the cities that once thrived under Roman rule, vibrant centers of commerce, culture, and power. Take a moment to visualize a place like Verulamium in the south, near what is now St. Albans, a bustling civitas capital. Or perhaps Viriconium Corniviorum in the west, once the 4th largest city in Roman Britain, a vibrant hub for the legion Valeria Victrix, its barracks and public buildings imposing. A few decades ago, these would have been vibrant centers of activity, humming with the sounds of commerce, the murmur of conversations in Latin and Brittonic, and the purposeful stride of citizens going about their daily lives. Now, as you gently observe, a different, quieter rhythm has taken hold. The grand public buildings, the basilicas where justice was administered and merchants met, the elegant temples where deities were worshipped with smoke and ritual, the vast bathhouses where citizens socialized, cleansed, and gossiped, which once teemed with life, are becoming noticeably quieter. Perhaps a roof tile has slipped from a grand portico, or a majestic archway shows the first hairline crack, allowing tendrils of ivy to begin their slow, persistent climb, weaving green tapestries over ancient stone. The intricate system of aqueducts, designed to bring fresh, flowing water from distant springs to fountains, private homes, and public facilities, might not be as diligently maintained. You might notice small trickles where once there were steady, gurgling flows, or perhaps patches of persistent dampness where pipes have begun to leak, returning the water slowly to the earth from which it came. The once crisp, clean air of the city might now carry the faintest hint of stagnation, a quiet decay settling in. The vibrant marketplaces, which once hummed with the eager exchange of Roman coins for fine pottery from Gaul, shimmering silk from the east, rich olive oil from Hispania, and exotic spices from across the vast empire, are now noticeably quieter. The intricate web of trade that once bound Britain to the vast Roman world is fraying, strand by strand, like a forgotten tapestry unpicking itself. Instead of the glint of a denarius or a solidus changing hands, perhaps you now see a farmer exchanging a sack of freshly harvested grain for a finely crafted iron tool from the local smith, its surface still warm from the forge. Or a weaver, her fingers nimble and skilled, trading lengths of sturdy wool cloth for a durable wooden bucket made by a cooper, the scent of fresh-cut wood still clinging to its staves. The subtle, reassuring hum of a monetary economy, so vital to Roman life, is slowly fading, giving way to a more direct, localized system of barter and reciprocal exchange. Life is becoming simpler, more reliant on what can be produced close at hand, within the immediate community, or through direct exchange with a trusted neighbor. The vast, interconnected world of the Roman Empire is shrinking, for many, to the comfortable or challenging boundaries of their valley or their village, a more insular existence. Consider the people themselves, the inhabitants of this changing land. They are no longer thinking of themselves primarily as Roman citizens, a title that once conferred status, rights, and an undeniable connection to a grand imperium. Instead, they increasingly identify as the inhabitants of their local communities, their ancestral tribes, or their shifting, smaller lands. Their concerns are becoming more immediate, more visceral, driven by the turning of the seasons and its direct impact on the vital harvest, the fertility of the soil, the well-being of their livestock, and crucially, the safety of their families from unseen dangers. The grand imperial decrees from Rome no longer reach them with the same force, or perhaps they do not reach them at all, becoming distant rumors. The very concept of a distant central authority is becoming a hazy memory, a faint echo from a past generation, replaced by the more tangible presence and protection of local leaders, those who can truly ensure their safety and survival. Listen closely. The sounds you might hear are profoundly different now, reflecting this new reality. Less of the insistent clatter of chariots on paved streets, or the measured shouts of legionaries on parade grounds. Instead, You might discern the gentle, rhythmic lowing of cattle in a nearby pasture, a comforting sound of agrarian life. You might hear the soft rustle of wind through ancient trees, a sound that has accompanied human life for millennia. And from a small, isolated settlement, the rhythmic, reassuring pounding of a blacksmith's hammer, shaping iron for tools or implements, a sound of enduring craftsmanship. The world is becoming more fragmented, more local, more attuned to the natural world and the immediate environment. Communities are turning inwards, becoming more self-sufficient, relying on their own strength, their own ingenuity, and the powerful ancient bonds of kinship and shared purpose. The quiet of the countryside is slowly, gently, overtaking the once bustling sounds of Roman urbanity. As you drift further into this scene, notice the structures that were once so imposing, yet now stand in quiet dignity, slowly returning to the earth. A grand Roman villa, perhaps. A sprawling country estate with dozens of rooms, its elegant architecture still visible through the encroaching vegetation. Its intricate mosaic floors, once polished to a gleaming finish, depicting mythological scenes or geometric patterns, might now be covered with a fine layer of dust, or perhaps in some abandoned rooms where the roof has fallen, a delicate tracery of weeds and moss is beginning to emerge from between the colorful tesserae, patiently reclaiming the space. The sophisticated heating systems, the hypocausts, which once warmed the floors and walls with circulating hot air from subterranean furnaces, are likely cold, their fires extinguished long ago, the smoke vents long since blocked, and the once warm air replaced by a persistent chill. Life within these villas, for those who remain, has adapted profoundly. Perhaps the grand dining rooms are now used for more practical purposes, like storing harvested grain or housing livestock during winter, or some rooms stand empty, echoing with the silence of abandonment, a poignant testament to changed times and altered fortunes. The once cultivated gardens might now be wild, their formal lines obscured by native plants. The security that the Roman presence once offered, the long peace known as the Pax Romana, which allowed for such sophisticated infrastructure and interconnected trade, is slowly dissolving. It is giving way to a new sense of gentle unease, a quiet vigilance that permeates daily life. Communities, no longer able to rely on distant legions or a central authority, begin to look entirely to their own defenses, to the immediate strength of their local leaders, and to the tangible protection they can organize for themselves. You might see the subtle, telltale signs of palisades being mended around settlements, their timbers reinforced against unseen threats, or watchtowers, once decorative or lightly manned, now manned with a renewed sense of purpose, their quiet sentinels scanning the horizons for any signs of movement or threat. Even the familiar sight of a ship in a harbor, once a harbinger of exotic goods and news from afar, might now provoke a moment of apprehension rather than anticipation of trade. For who knows what intentions its crew carries? This is not a sudden, dramatic collapse, no thunderous fall of an empire, but a gradual, almost imperceptible softening, a slow return to a more localized and agrarian existence. The Roman legacy doesn't vanish overnight. It fades, like an old fresco exposed to the elements, its vibrant colors mellowing and its sharp lines blurring into the background of the British landscape. The very stones seem to breathe differently, settling into a new, ancient rhythm, attuned to the land rather than to a distant capital. Feel the quiet stillness of this profound transformation, the way the land itself seems to breathe a sigh of ancient air, adjusting to a new, gentler cadence. Allow these images of a quietly transforming world, of subtle shifts and enduring resilience, to guide you deeper into a state of peace and profound rest. The past is vast, and its changes are slow, like the movement of ancient glaciers, imperceptible day by day, but profound and reshaping over generations. The remnants are there, if you choose to perceive them, embedded in the very earth beneath you. As the gentle currents of time carry us forward, we drift from the quiet fading of Roman order into a new, more fragmented landscape, a rich, complex patchwork of emerging territories. Imagine the subtle yet profound shifts that begin to occur across the British Isles, a transformation from a relatively unified province into a mosaic of smaller, more localized powers. The grand, sweeping narratives of empire are replaced by the more intimate, yet often turbulent stories of local leaders and their emerging micro-kingdoms. This is a chapter of survival, of adaptation, and of the slow, organic birth of new identities. The period from the 5th to the 7th centuries, often termed the Dark Ages, wasn't necessarily dark in the sense of ignorance or a complete lack of learning. Rather, it's dark more so in its historical obscurity. A time when written records became scarce, like flickering embers in a vast night. What little light we have comes from archaeology, from the whispers of later legends, and from the careful interpretation of what little contemporary evidence remains. Perhaps a single inscribed stone, a short entry in a distant chronicle, or the careful excavation of a forgotten settlement. It was a time of immense, sweeping change, a fundamental reshaping of the very fabric of society, as people adapted to a world without the familiar Roman scaffolding, learning to build anew from the fragments of the old. Picture the grand Roman cities we spoke of earlier. Places like Viraconium, once bustling with thousands of inhabitants, its public spaces alive with the murmur of voices, its shops displaying goods from afar. Now, they begin to shrink dramatically. The vast networks of streets and buildings that once housed a large, urbanized population are gradually abandoned, not in a single catastrophic event, but through a slow, quiet attrition. Perhaps a family might choose to leave their damp stone townhouse, its roof beginning to leak irrevocably, for a simpler, more manageable timber structure built within the relative safety of old Roman walls that are easier to defend, or beside a familiar, smaller river. People might move to more defensible locations, perhaps closer to a fertile river valley that provides consistent water for farming and fishing, or a sheltered hill offering a strategic view of the surrounding lands. The impressive stone buildings, designed for an urbanized lifestyle with grand public functions, no longer serve the immediate, practical needs of a population that is increasingly rural and focused on self-sufficiency. Parts of these once proud cities become overgrown, their stones reused for simpler, more practical structures like small farmsteads or defensive palisades, or perhaps left to stand as silent, weathered monuments to a bygone era, slowly crumbling back into the earth, covered by moss and climbing vines. The silence of their ruins would have been profound, broken only by the wind or the calls of wild birds. Into this shifting landscape steps a new kind of leader, the petty warlord or the local tyrant, a term which, in this context, simply means a ruler who gained power not necessarily by dynastic right alone, but often through force of personality, military prowess, and the vital ability to protect their community. This isn't a figure of grand imperial authority connected to a vast, distant network, but someone who commands respect and fierce personal loyalty through sheer strength, strategic acumen, and the crucial ability to offer security. Imagine such a figure. Perhaps a former Roman auxiliary commander who, seeing the imperial retreat, simply remained in Britain, retaining his military skills and his loyal retinues of battle-hardened men. Or a powerful local chieftain whose lineage stretches back to pre-Roman Celtic times, now reasserting ancient rites and traditions that had been suppressed under Roman rule. They would be skilled warriors, fearless in battle, perhaps wise arbitrators of disputes, settling grievances directly and firmly. And crucially, they would be seen as the vital shield against the increasing uncertainties and dangers of the age, whether from rival groups, opportunistic raiders from the sea, or simply the sheer harshness of nature and famine. These emerging leaders begin to carve out small territories, often based on ancient tribal boundaries that predated Roman conquest, or naturally defensible positions like river crossings, strategic hilltops, or areas rich in natural resources. We begin to hear whispers, carried across generations through oral tradition and later written records, of names like Regith, a kingdom nestled in the northwest, in what is now southern Scotland and northern England, its heartland perhaps around Carlisle, or Gododin, further east in the Lothian region, near what is now Edinburgh, and Elmet, situated in what is now Yorkshire, a verdant, defensible territory. These aren't empires in the vast, centralized Roman sense. They are smaller, more intimate polities, perhaps just a collection of fortified settlements, a handful of interconnected villages, and their surrounding farmlands and hunting grounds. Their power might stem from a strong, revered lineage passed down through generations, a loyal band of elite warriors who are personally bound to their leader, or simply their unparalleled ability to provide security and decisive leadership in an insecure world. Consider the rhythm of daily life within such a micro-kingdom. The days would be utterly dominated by the practicalities of survival and the endless cycles of the seasons. Dedicated farming of essential crops like barley and oats, the careful herding of livestock, sheep, cattle, pigs, that provided meat, milk, wool, and hides, the relentless crafting of essential tools from iron and wood, plowshares, axes, hammers, weaving implements, and critically, the constant maintenance of defenses, mending palisades, clearing watch paths, training for protection. The traditional lines between military duty and agricultural labor would blur, if they existed at all. Every able-bodied person, from the farmer in the field to the artisan at the forge, would contribute directly to the community's survival, often with a weapon close at hand, ready to be seized at a moment's notice. The court of such a king might not be a grand palace of marble and fresco, but a large communal hall, perhaps a rebuilt Roman villa adapted for a new purpose, its grand spaces now serving a more communal function, or a newly constructed wooden stronghold, its timbers strong and sturdy, often built on an ancient, defensible site. Here, important decisions are made around a communal hearth, perhaps by the flickering light of a central fire, and where loyalty is forged through shared meals, the recounting of heroic tales of ancestors, and a common purpose to endure and thrive against all odds. While the Roman state provided a distant, abstract justice system enforced by legions and magistrates, now the law of the land is often administered directly by the local king or his appointed reeve or brehon, a traditional Celtic judge. Disputes might be settled through negotiation and arbitration, or often through more direct, forceful means, such as trial by ordeal, a test of courage or divine favor, or wager of battle, reflecting a reliance on personal courage and a belief in divine judgment. The focus is on immediate resolution, on maintaining order within the small community, and on ensuring the well-being and stability of the collective. The concept of justice is becoming more personal, more immediate, less abstract, rooted in the relationships and honor within the community. These emerging kingdoms were often in a state of delicate balance, their existence precarious, constantly shifting alliances and rivalries shaping their fluid borders. A petty king's authority might extend only as far as his warriors could effectively ride in a day, securing the loyalty of outlying villages, or as far as his fearsome reputation preceded him, deterring potential rivals. The landscape between these small power centers might become a kind of buffer zone, perhaps wilder, less settled, and more prone to the incursions of brigands, isolated warbands, or rival groups seeking to expand their influence. These liminal spaces would be places of quiet apprehension, where the lone traveler must be perpetually vigilant, the air thick with unspoken possibilities. Imagine a clear, star-lit night in one of these nascent kingdoms. The air is cool, perhaps a little crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke from the hearth fires and damp leaves from the nearby forest. You might hear the distant howl of a wolf from the encroaching forests, or the subtle rustle of leaves in the ancient woodlands that presses closer to human settlements than before, as cultivated lands revert to wilderness. The soft, subtle glow of hearth fires would be the only lights visible for miles across the darkened landscape, each one marking a small pocket of human endeavor, a tiny flame of civilization in a world that was slowly returning to a wilder, more untamed state. The comforting sense of a grand, interconnected world, linked by imperial roads and universal law, has faded, replaced by the intimate, visceral realities of the local valley, the nearest defensive hill, and the strength of one's own community and its chosen leader. The stars above, however, remain constant, a silent, ancient comfort. This period, though seemingly chaotic and often challenging, was also a time of immense resilience and remarkable adaptation. The people of Britain, no longer under the grand Roman umbrella, were forced to forge new identities, new loyalties, and new ways of life, learning to depend on themselves and their immediate neighbors in ways their ancestors had not for centuries. They drew on ancient traditions and innovated new solutions. Allow this gentle image of a fragmented but profoundly resilient land, and its emerging leaders grappling with immense change, to settle into your mind as you drift deeper into peaceful slumber. The past holds profound lessons of endurance, even in its quietest and most challenging moments, reminding us of the human capacity to adapt and persist. As we drift further into the stillness of this historical night, our journey takes us into a realm where the earth itself seems to hold secrets, and the very air carries whispers of profound change. Not from human hands, but from forces far grander and more ancient. We turn our attention now to events that transcended the local skirmishes and the rise of petty kings, powerful forces of nature and unseen threats that swept across the land, leaving an indelible mark on the lives of those in post-Roman Britain, shaping their very existence and their understanding of the world. Imagine, if you will, the early summer of the year 535 AD. The sun, usually a comforting and vital presence in the northern skies, the very source of light and warmth for growing things, begins to behave strangely. Instead of its usual brilliant, life-giving light, it appears dimmed, almost as if seen through a permanent veil of smoke or a perpetual twilight. This wasn't merely a cloudy day or a fleeting storm. This was a global phenomenon, so profound that it was described in ancient annals across continents, from Ireland to China, from Byzantium to the Germanic lands, as a year without sun or a dry fog. Imagine the apprehension that would have rippled through communities as day after day, week after week, the sun remained a pale, indistinct orb in the sky, its heat diminished. The cause, as modern science now suggests through meticulous analysis of ice cores from ancient glaciers and the precise rings of ancient trees, was likely a massive volcanic eruption, perhaps thousands of miles away in Iceland or Central America, like Ilopango in El Salvador. This colossal eruption would have spewed vast quantities of ash and aerosols high into the atmosphere, creating a persistent global haze that circled the globe and stubbornly obscured the sun's life-giving rays for months, even years, affecting the entire northern hemisphere. Consider the profound, quiet impact of such an event on a society already grappling with profound changes, already living close to the edge of subsistence. The days would be noticeably cooler, the light muted and eerie, casting a pale, unsettling glow over the entire landscape. The vibrant colors of nature would be subdued, almost monochrome, lacking their usual brilliance. The subtle hum of insects, so vital for pollination and the ecosystem's balance, might be less frequent, their activity diminished. The songs of birds might be more subdued, reflecting a world out of balance, its natural rhythms disrupted. For the agrarian communities, utterly reliant on the sun for their crops and the warmth that allows them to grow, the consequences would be devastating. The growing season would be drastically shortened, or crops might fail altogether, stunted and withered by the persistent lack of light and warmth. The air, even in summer, would carry a persistent chill, a tangible reminder of the sun's absence, bringing an early and harsh winter. Imagine the quiet desperation that would slowly, inexorably, settle over the land as the harvests dwindled year after year. Food supplies, already localized and precarious after the breakdown of Roman trade, would become critically scarce. This would lead to widespread famine, not a dramatic, sudden starvation for most, but a slow, grinding hunger that would weaken bodies, dim spirits, and make everyone more vulnerable to disease. You might envision fields where the grain stands stunted and pale, where the ears are sparse and underdeveloped, offering little yield, or orchards where the fruit withers on the branch, never ripening to plump sweetness. The livestock, too, would suffer, their pastures yielding less. The air might carry the faint, unsettling scent of unharvested, decaying crops, mixed with the ever-present smell of damp earth and the quiet desperation of a hungry populace. Survival would depend on careful rationing, on foraging for wild plants, and on the hope that the next season would bring better fortune. Then, as if the land itself were sighing under the weight of these calamities, another, more terrifying shadow began to creep across the known world, an insidious whisper reaching even the distant, increasingly isolated shores of Britain. Around 542 AD, just as the cold and hunger deepened, the first great pandemic of bubonic plague, often referred to by historians as the Plague of Justinian, after the Byzantine emperor whose empire it also ravaged, spreading from Egypt, swept through Europe and eventually made its insidious way to the British Isles. This was an ancient enemy, recorded in earlier times, but its widespread, devastating return was unprecedented in its scope. Unlike the visible blight on the crops, this was an invisible enemy, carried silently and relentlessly by fleas on rats, silently infiltrating homes and communities, often arriving on ships that had once brought trade. There would be no dramatic battles against this foe, no heroic last stands against a visible enemy that could be met with sword and shield. Instead, imagine the quiet terror, the insidious spread of sickness through a village, often starting with a single, inexplicable fever. A cough here, a persistent fever there, Then the horrifying appearance of the dreaded buboes, the painful swollen lymph nodes in the armpits and groin, the unmistakable, terrifying mark of the plague. These swellings would turn black, and death often followed swiftly. The rhythm of daily life, already altered by the years of famine and climatic upheaval, would be utterly disrupted, replaced by a new, somber beat. The familiar sounds of human activity, the chatter of markets, the laughter of children playing in the streets, the singing of laborers in the fields, might diminish further, replaced by a chilling silence. Where there were once the joyful sounds of communal life, there might be only hushed movements and the quiet grief of survivors. The gentle buzz of community life would be replaced by the hushed movements of the grieving, the quiet, somber burial of the dead, often in hastily dug graves outside the usual burial grounds, as the sheer number of fatalities overwhelmed normal practices. The traditional healing methods, often effective against common ailments and seasonal sicknesses, would be utterly powerless against this new, virulent disease, leading to a profound sense of helplessness and despair. Communities, desperate for any answer, would often turn to supernatural explanations or see it as divine punishment. As the plague continued its relentless march, communities would become isolated, fearing contact with others for fear of catching or spreading the invisible contagion. Travel between settlements, already reduced after Rome's withdrawal, would become even more fraught with peril. The very pathways and tracks that once connected people, however poorly maintained, would now seem to carry the threat of contagion. The atmosphere would be heavy with an unspoken sorrow, a quiet resignation to forces beyond human control, prompting deep existential questions about fate, divine will, and the meaning of suffering. This was a time when the gods, old and new, from the ancient pagan deities to the emerging Christian God, were surely being invoked for mercy, for an end to the pervasive suffering. Archaeological evidence, unearthed centuries later by patient and meticulous hands, speaks to the profound and long-lasting impact of these events. Burials from this period often show evidence of malnutrition, a testament to the famine years, with skeletons bearing marks of stress and disease. And while mass graves explicitly for the plague are relatively rare in Britain, compared to some parts of the continent, a general decline in settlement activity and a significant, demonstrable drop in population size can be inferred from the archaeological record. The very population of Britain, already decentralized and less numerous than in the Roman heyday, would have been severely reduced, perhaps by as much as a quarter or even more in some regions, leaving a vastly emptier land. This demographic catastrophe would have further fractured society, breaking family lines and weakening existing power structures, leaving vast swathes of land thinly populated, allowing the wild to reclaim once tamed areas as forests spread and fields lay fallow for generations. Yet, amidst this quiet devastation, amidst the twin shadows of famine and plague, life persisted. Those who survived, often with profound trauma, would have clung to their beliefs with renewed fervor, seeking solace and meaning in a world turned upside down. Perhaps they sought comfort in the emerging Christian faiths that were slowly spreading from Ireland and the continent, with their message of hope and an afterlife. Or perhaps they reverted to older, more familiar pagan traditions, seeking protection from ancient spirits of the land and sky. The memory of these times would have been passed down, not in grand historical accounts, for those were rarely written in these fragmented centuries, but in the quiet telling of stories around a flickering fire, in the subtle changes in agricultural practices adapted for colder, shorter seasons, and in the deep-seated resilience forged in the face of immense, shared adversity. This resilience speaks volumes of the human spirit's capacity to endure, even when faced with overwhelming odds. Allow this profound sense of the Earth's cycles, of the quiet, overwhelming power of natural forces, and the enduring spirit of survival in the face of the unseen, to guide you into a state of even deeper, more peaceful rest. The Earth remembers, even when human records are silent, and in its enduring presence, we find a sense of quiet calm. As our journey through the twilight of post-Roman Britain gently unfolds, we now turn our gaze to the changing social landscape, observing how power structures evolved and how daily life diverged across different cultural groups. The old hierarchies, once rigidly defined by Roman citizenship, wealth derived from imperial trade, and a centralized administrative structure, are subtly giving way to new forms of power, new identities, and new ways of life. Imagine the subtle contrasts that emerge, not just between rich and poor, but between the lingering Romanized Britons and the vigorous, expanding Anglo-Saxon newcomers, now vying for influence and territory across the island, each bringing their own customs, languages, and ways of seeing the world. This is a story of cultural intermingling and territorial assertion, unfolding slowly, organically, like a vast geological process. Consider first the lives of the elite in this transforming world, specifically those Romanized Britons who had once formed the backbone of the provincial administration and the landowning class. These were the descendants of families who had fully adopted Roman customs, built grand villas, invested in sophisticated amenities, and often spoke Latin as fluently as their native Brittonic. They faced a profound, existential choice. Some might have attempted to maintain their former lifestyles, perhaps retreating to their grand, albeit crumbling, fortified estates. Their days might have been filled with the anxious task of managing increasingly independent laborers, trying to preserve their dwindling resources as trade networks collapsed, and perhaps even engaging in complex, small-scale diplomacy with the emerging local strongmen, whether Brittonic or Germanic. The fine Roman tableware, perhaps imported from Gaul centuries ago, would still be on their tables, a symbol of past grandeur. But perhaps the food served on it would be simpler, more locally sourced. The delicate spices of Rome replaced by herbs from the immediate garden, as the supply chains from distant lands long since severed. Their private libraries, once filled with precious Latin scrolls of philosophy, law, and literature, might now gather dust, their parchment slowly decaying as the scholarly pursuits of a broader empire became less relevant to immediate survival and the daily struggle for security. Their knowledge of Roman law and administration, once a source of power and prestige, now had little practical application beyond their own small, isolated domains, as new customary laws emerged. They were often figures of dwindling influence, clinging to the remnants of a fading glory, surrounded by a world that was becoming increasingly alien. But another, far more powerful and transformative shift was occurring, particularly in the eastern and southern parts of Britain, in the fertile lowlands. For decades, even centuries, Roman governors had employed Germanic mercenaries, skilled warriors from tribes like the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes, often from regions now known as northern Germany, Denmark, and the Low Countries, to defend their coasts against seaborne raiders from the continent. These were fearsome fighters, often paid in land or goods. Now, with Roman authority decisively gone, these mercenaries, and indeed new waves of migrants, found themselves in a new, unprecedented position of power. They were disciplined, effective warriors, organized into coherent tribal units, and crucially, they began to settle, first in small groups, then in larger, more permanent migrations, often taking over the most fertile lands along the coasts and river valleys, pushing inland. Imagine the gentle, undulating hills of what would become East Anglia or the verdant plains of Kent. Here, the distinct rhythm of Anglo-Saxon life would begin to emerge and take root, a different pulse for the land. Their settlements were often simpler in construction, but robust, sturdy timber-built halls, often longhouses housing entire families and their dependents, perhaps surrounded by a formidable palisade for defense against both human and animal threats. Their social structure was fundamentally different from the Roman model, based less on abstract law and more on strong, personal loyalties to chieftains and kings, whose authority was earned through prowess in battle, wisdom in council, and demonstrable generosity to their followers, their comitatus or warband. The bond between a lord and his retainers was sacred, forged in loyalty and shared hardship. Their daily lives would have revolved around hard farming, the cultivation of essential grains like barley, oats, and wheat, the tending of sturdy livestock, sheep, cattle, pigs, that provided meat, milk, wool, and hides. There was also the relentless crafting of essential tools from iron and wood, the intricate jewelry of gold and silver demonstrating status, and, crucially, the constant readiness for conflict. For their world was one of shifting borders and raiding. The sounds of their daily life might include the lowing of their hardy cattle, the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer shaping iron tools or formidable weapons, the cheerful, guttural sounds of their language, Old English, slowly but surely taking root in the British soil, often replacing the Brittonic languages in the areas they settled. In the evenings, the great halls would resonate with the sounds of feasting, the clatter of drinking horns, and the deep, resonant voices of Scops, bards, singing epic sagas of heroes, battles, and ancient lineages, binding the community together through shared story and history. The lives of these emerging Anglo-Saxon elites contrasted sharply with the dwindling Romanized aristocracy. While the Romanized Briton might lament the loss of sophisticated bathhouses, fine wines, and interconnected trade, the Anglo-Saxon chieftain would value skill with a sword or spear, the unwavering loyalty of his warriors, the strength of his hall, and the bounty of a successful raid or a plentiful harvest. Their homes, their clothing, their very worldview would be rooted in a more martial, yet also deeply communal and honor-bound way of life, with a strong emphasis on kinship and shared feasting as the bedrock of society. Their artistic expression, seen in their intricate metalwork, like the exquisite brooches and buckles, and magnificent burial hoards, like Sutton Hoo in East Anglia, speaks of a vibrant, powerful culture, rich in symbolism and craftsmanship, not a dark age in any sense of cultural poverty. Yet, it wasn't a complete displacement across the entire island. In some areas, particularly in the rugged west and the resilient north, the Brittonic peoples, the direct descendants of the pre-Roman inhabitants of Britain, held firm. Kingdoms like Regith, situated in the lands that would become southern Scotland and northern England, perhaps centered around modern Carlisle or Dumfries, led by legendary figures such as Urien, fiercely resisted the encroachment of the Anglo-Saxons for generations. Imagine their strongholds, perhaps ancient hill forts that had been continuously occupied for millennia, their earthworks formidable and weathered, or skillfully repurposed Roman fortifications. Their old stone walls providing new layers of defense, standing defiantly against the encroaching tide of Germanic settlement. Their bards, like the famed Taliesin, who sang of Urien and his son Owain, would gather in halls, perhaps not of timber but often of stone, singing of heroic deeds and mournful losses, preserving a rich oral tradition that spoke of ancient kings, fierce battles, and the enduring spirit of their people. The echoes of these powerful songs, though faint and filtered through centuries of retelling, resonate even today in the foundation of the Arthurian legend, a quiet but profound testament to their enduring spirit and resistance, their yearning for a lost age of heroes. Life in these Brittonic kingdoms would retain more elements of their older Celtic traditions, blended perhaps with lingering Roman influences in their legal structures or early forms of Christianity, which had spread to parts of Britain during the Roman period. Their leaders would be warrior kings, but also guardians of ancient customs, genealogical lineages stretching back to mythic ancestors, and the spiritual well-being of their people, often advised by Christian holy men. The sounds here might be the haunting melodies of their ancient tongue, distinct from the emerging Old English, perhaps a lyrical flowing sound. The rhythmic beat of a handloom producing finely woven cloth adorned with intricate patterns, or the distant, clear call of a hunting horn echoing across misty hillsides, signaling the pursuit of game. Their communities, often centered around small, defensible monastic sites or fortified farmsteads, maintained a tenacious hold on their heritage. This period, though defined by conflict and shifting power, was not simply one of relentless warfare, but also of subtle cultural fusion and unexpected interaction. Despite the battles and territorial disputes, there would have been instances of intermarriage between elite families, necessary trade of goods, and the slow, inevitable mingling of customs, beliefs, and even words. An Anglo-Saxon lord might marry a Brittonic princess to secure an alliance and bring new lands into his sphere of influence, or a Roman road, though degraded, might still be used by both peoples for cautious travel and limited commerce, its ancient stones bearing the weight of new feet and new purposes. The landscape itself would bear witness to this blending. New Anglo-Saxon place names, often ending in ham, meaning village or home, tun, meaning farmstead or enclosure, or ing, meaning people of, beginning to appear alongside ancient Brittonic ones, creating a linguistic tapestry that reflected the ongoing transformation of the land and its peoples. Even the adoption of Christianity, often brought by Brittonic missionaries from the West, like those from Ireland, or later by Roman missionaries from the southeast, like Saint Augustine, became a unifying, if sometimes contested, force across these disparate groups, slowly weaving a new cultural thread across the island, influencing law, art, and daily thought. Feel the quiet tension and the slow, inexorable adaptation of these differing societies. The land, once under a single Roman authority, was now a dynamic patchwork of varied customs, languages, and ways of life, each group trying to forge its own future amidst the lingering shadows of the past and the emerging dawn of new, powerful kingdoms. Allow these images of contrasting lives, shifting allegiances, and the quiet resilience of ancient peoples to gently carry you into a profound and peaceful sleep. The earth continues its slow rotation, indifferent to the rise and fall of empires, and in its steadfastness, we find our own calm, a sense of deep, enduring continuity. As our gentle journey through the mists of post-Roman Britain draws to a close, allow the images and echoes of this transformative era to settle softly in your mind. We've explored a time of profound change, a period when the grand structures of an empire quietly receded, giving way to a more localized, often more challenging, yet ultimately more intimate rhythm of life. We've walked the overgrown roads that once buzzed with imperial traffic, heard the whispers of emerging micro-kingdoms asserting their fragile authority, felt the chill of a sun-dimmed sky during times of great hardship, and witnessed the deep resilience of people forging new paths amidst shifting allegiances and the twin shadows of climate and disease. Think for a moment of the enduring legacy that reaches even into our present day. Though many of the Old North kingdoms, like Gododin in the east and Regith in the west, eventually faded from immediate political view, absorbed or diminished by the rising Anglo-Saxon powers, their memory, their spirit, did not vanish entirely. It lingered, preserved in the evocative verses of Welsh bardic poetry, carefully recited and passed down through generations around flickering hearths. These ancient songs echo tales of heroic kings like Urien, a powerful warrior who bravely resisted the Anglo-Saxons, and his son Owain, whose legend contributed to later Arthurian cycles, and the wise words of the revered bard Taliesin, whose poetry painted vivid pictures of their world. These are not merely historical records, but profound whispers from a vanished heroic age, preserving fragments of a time when the Brittonic spirit shone brightly against the encroaching tide, a testament to endurance and cultural survival against overwhelming odds. Even in the landscape around us today, if you were to look closely, you might still find faint imprints of this era, silent witnesses to ancient lives that once populated these lands. A quiet mound in a farmer's field that was once a fortified settlement, its earthworks still perceptible. A subtle shift in a rolling hill's contour, marking an ancient boundary between long-forgotten kingdoms. Or the enduring presence of a place name, subtly altered by centuries of evolving language that speaks to a forgotten past, a linguistic fossil of a bygone age. The very fabric of Britain, its language, its cultures, its people, bears the indelible marks of this entire period of transition, a slow, deep transformation that painstakingly shaped the future of an island, laying the foundations for what would one day become England and Wales, Scotland and Cornwall. As you reflect on this long-ago world, consider how the fundamental concerns of those who lived through these immense changes, the essential need for security, the constant search for sustenance, the powerful desire for community and belonging, the struggle to find meaning in an uncertain world, are, in essence, timeless. Though their world was vastly different from our own, filled with challenges we can only begin to imagine, the fundamental human experience connects us across the centuries, a thread of shared experience weaving through time, reminding us of our common humanity across all ages. Now, as the present moment gently reclaims your awareness, feel the profound comfort of your own bed, the reassuring warmth of your surroundings, and the deep, abiding calm that comes from this quiet, historical exploration. Let the distant echoes of history softly fade into the peaceful silence, allowing your mind to settle and your body to relax completely, surrendering to the quietude of the night. The grand narrative of the past has now softly concluded, leaving you in a space of tranquility and profound rest. Drift now, effortlessly and deeply, into the soothing embrace of sleep, carrying with you only the profound quietude of a journey well taken and the gentle understanding that all things change and all things ultimately find their peace. If you found this journey through history captivating, we invite you to subscribe to our channel for more. Your likes, comments, and shares help us grow a community of curious minds who love exploring the past. Dive deeper into our library, where we uncover the cultures, conflicts, and legacies of ancient civilizations. Join us as we continue this timeless adventure, one story at a time.